Hi AP English students, my name is Miss Klingler, and just a year ago I was in your shoes in Miss Rogi's AP Lit class. So today we're going to start talking about Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, which you'll begin reading in next class. But today is sort of our prep day where we're going to cover some background information, some information about Conrad himself, about the context in which the book was written, and then some of the basics of the book, like the main characters, the setting, things like that. All important information for you to get the most out of your reading experience as possible. So your prep day sort of has two aspects. The second aspect is a web quest, which is sort of an online scavenger hunt that you'll be completing later on. But right now we're going to focus on this Prezi, which covers some of the bare bones that you need to know about the book. So we'll go ahead and get started. Alright, we'll start out by talking about Joseph Conrad himself, the author of Heart of Darkness. He was born in 1857 and died in 1924. This next bullet looks really confusing because of all the countries we have going on. But he was born in what is present-day Ukraine. The national boundaries have obviously changed numerous times since 1857. So today it's considered part of Ukraine. He was born to a Polish family, but he was a Russian citizen. But then in 1886 he became an English citizen. And he couldn't speak English fluently until he was in his 20s. But in the latter part of his life, he himself said that he considered himself an English citizen above all. And then he had a wife and 2 sons. Okay, so that was a little bit about Joseph Conrad's life. Now we'll talk about his career. For 19 years, he was a merchant marine, so he spent a lot of time at sea, and these experiences really translated into a lot of his writing. So a lot of his writing takes place on the ocean. And Heart of Darkness is probably his most well-known book, but he had some other well-known works like Lord Jim, Nostromo. After Heart of Darkness, that's probably his most famous book, and The Secret Agent. And Conrad's writing style inspired a lot of authors that came after him, like F. Scott Fitzgerald, author of The Great Gatsby, William Faulkner, who wrote Absalom, Absalom, Sound and the Fury, A Light in August, Ernest Hemingway, who wrote The Old Man and the Sea, For Whom the Bell Tolls, George Orwell, the author of 1984, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who wrote 100 Years of Solitude and Love in the Time of Cholera, and others. Those are some huge names. I can't imagine even influencing one of these authors, but to have an impact on all of them is pretty remarkable. Okay, so now we'll go on to talk a little bit about the publication of Heart of Darkness and the time period in which it was written. Understanding the context of the time period will really help you understand why Conrad made some of the choices that he made and just how meaningful those are. So the book was published in 1899. In 1899, it began to be published serially, which means in sections, in some sort of periodical, like a newspaper or magazine. And I believe it was 1902 when it was published as a cohesive novel. In 1899 was the end of the Victorian era and into the modernist era. So the Victorian era, named after Queen Victoria in the 1800s, literature of the time period focused on social reform, on the huge difference in power between the working class and the nobility. It held people to a very high moral standard and focused on utilitarianism, which technically means the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So Victorian literature was very much about society as a whole. And modernist literature really rebelled against that, and it focused on the fragmentation of society. And instead of focusing on the community and focusing on people as groups, it focused a lot on the inner self and individual beliefs and values and principles, things like that. And then finally, modernist literature was sort of a rebellion against the rigidity of Victorian values. And to give you an idea of some other popular writers at the time, Thomas Hardy was popular during this time. He wrote Tess of the D'Urbervilles, some popular poetry, Far from the Madding Crowd. H.G. Wells, who wrote The Time Machine and other science fiction, and Henry James, who wrote mysteries like Turn of the Screw. Okay, we'll move on now. So now we'll start talking about some of the basics of the book itself. We'll start with the main characters. So the protagonist of the novel is Marlowe. And Marlowe is English, but he works for a Belgian company. And Marlowe is a sailor on a ship traveling from England to Africa. And he's very skeptical, but also very thoughtful. And then the other main character is Kurtz, and the purpose of Marlowe's journey is to come to Africa to see Kurtz. He hears a lot about Kurtz, and he's a very civilized and intellectual European man. And then we also have the narrator. The narrator isn't a significant character himself per se, but he is on the boat with Marlowe traveling to meet Kurtz. So he's sort of witnessing the events that are taking place and writing his own account. And then just while I'm erasing this, I'll tell you about this little picture down here. This is an illustration of the two main characters in the book, and this line, the horror, is one of the most famous lines in the book, which I find funny because it's so short. Okay, now we'll talk about the setting. So like we said before, the story takes place on a ship. It starts off in the Thames River in England and is traveling to the African Congo, to the portion of Africa which was colonized by Belgium. It takes place in the 1890s during the colonial era, which we will cover now. Okay, so just some basics about the colonial era. It was a time during which European countries were rushing and competing to colonize Africa. So they said that they want to civilize these countries, bring them out of their third world statuses, educate the people, better their lives. But really that was all sort of a front. Most of these people really just wanted to strip Africa of all of the rich resources that it had. So because people were really just after resources, there was a lot of maltreatment of African natives. There's this really cool Discovery Channel video, which I won't play right now, but I highly recommend you go back and check out. It's really short and it's really packed full of valuable information. Okay, now I'm just going to give you a couple of plot basics. I don't want to give very much away, but I'll just provide the skeleton for you right now. So Marlowe, like we said before, is a sailor on a ship traveling from England to the Belgian Congo. And he's traveling to Africa to seek out Kurtz, who is this supposedly noble, civilized, intellectual man. And during his time on the ship, he really realizes just how horrible the corruption is within the colonial system and how poorly people are being treated. And he's not only surprised by that, but he's also surprised by the type of man that Kurtz really is. And I can't tell you any more about that, but it's definitely a surprise. Okay. And now, one of my favorite things about classic literature is just how relevant it still is in our society. So many books and movies and remakes of movies have been inspired by classic literature, and Heart of Darkness is no different. So Modern Library, a popular publishing company, created a list of the top 100 novels of all time. It created one compiled by board members. The board members were popular authors, literary experts, professors, people like that. And then there was also a list created by readers. And Heart of Darkness made both of these lists of top 100 novels, so it's a pretty big deal. And one of the movie adaptations of like a classic novel like this, there's actually an adaptation of Heart of Darkness. In 1979, Francis Ford Coppola took the themes of Heart of Darkness and adapted them to the Vietnam War in the film Apocalypse Now. And I think this is really cool because it just goes to show that so many pieces of classic literature are found in pop culture today without us even realizing it. So that's pretty cool. Alright, and that's all I have for you with this Prezi. We'll go ahead and move on to the web quest. Thanks, guys.